every single time those behavioral triggers would happen, rather than me acknowledging those moments and going, okay, I recognize this. This is one of those behavioral triggers. I would just let it take its course and have that fight or flight response. And I would end up in the same situation. Even though I knew it was an issue, even though I knew what was going on, even though I knew it was something I needed to get better at, the same situation would come and go. Once you acknowledge it within yourself, you can recognize that moment. You can begin to understand that, okay, this is something that's happened before. This is a moment that I need to overcome. For me, with my eating, for me, with my the way I was perceived by others, it was just acknowledging that was something I needed to overcome, and by doing that, it made me aware of those moments where that was controlling my life, not my actual decisions or not what I actually wanted to do. Camera is rolling, and welcome back to episode 26 of the podcast. Episode 26. I'm hyped to be here. I'm excited about this. I hope you've all had a wonderful week last week, or if you're listening to this on Monday, I hope you all had a wonderful week. And if you didn't have a wonderful week, well, there's nothing wrong with that, because, it's okay not to have a great week every now and again. But I hope after listening to this podcast, you at least start your week to come on the right foot. I sound like a crazy person right now, but I do hope that you had at least a good week. And if you didn't have a good week, I hope you're on track to have a better week. I think I wrote something in my journal the other day, because what was it? At the start of last week, so this past week that has just happened, I just had a couple weeks of inconsistencies with, I spoke about this last week, how I said that it hasn't been a great few weeks for me, not in any, just internally, working through my own issues as far as work and as far as dealing with everything going on here in Melbourne. I'm sorry, I'm being fidgety again, but dealing with everything going on here in Melbourne, I just had I was just having a rough few weeks, and I kind of wrote in my journal, I was like, okay, this week, you're going to have a better week. And to my surprise, or not surprise, because that's the intention of why I wrote it, I did have a better week. So I want to encourage all of you, even if you did have an awesome week, I want to encourage you to tell yourself that you're going to have a better week, or tell yourself that you're going to continue having a good week. And if you didn't have such a good week, I want to encourage you to encourage yourself, or at least tell yourself that you can have a better week this week. And I believe in you. I believe you can. I had a conversation with a friend just before, and I said something that resonated with me and said something that resonated with him. I essentially said to him, because he's having a tough time dealing with the fact that this year's kind of become a write-off in a lot of ways. 2020 has kind of become a write-off. And for a lot of us, especially at my age, for me, it's a little bit different, because I've been in my career for the last I think it's 3 years, almost to the day. I was on my LinkedIn the other day, and it ticked over from 2 years to 3 years on my job, or my my business, if you will. And I got a little bit excited about that, but I think it's different in that sense, because I've kind of got a few years under my belt. I'm also thinking very, very long term, but for a lot of my friends, they're going through that period of time where they're finishing uni, they're getting into work, or they're into those final stages of uni if they're in longer degrees. And this year kind of, hit a brick wall for a lot of them. And for a lot of them, they're struggling. And I said to him, I was like, mate, the positive that you can take away from this is if you're not struggling with this year, if you are someone who is doing okay with 2020, then you're quite clearly not a very ambitious person. Because I think if you have any sort of ambition, and I'm not trying to say that there are people that are working through this well. There are people who are having their best year ever. But I think that if you have been affected, and let me take that back, because there have been parts of this year where I've been very happy with myself. I think this podcast is one of those things where, maybe my business isn't making as much money, but my podcast is doing exceptionally well. And this podcast is kind of a byproduct of this whole situation. So I want to take that back. But essentially, if you've had a year where maybe your degree has been put on hold, maybe your work has stopped, maybe your particular field of work has kind of been slowed right down. A lot of my creative friends, for example, a lot of their work has been completely slowed down. And I think if you're one of those people who have been directly affected, if you're doing okay with this, then you're quite clearly not a very ambitious person. And I think that he resonated with that a lot because it made him realize it's like, okay, at least I have a reason for why I'm feeling bad. And my ambition, at least the fact that I'm an ambitious person, I can hold that and hold my head high in that sense that ambition is going to carry me at least through on the other side. So I hope all of you are doing okay. I do really hope you're doing okay. I hope you're trucking on through. I hope you're, keeping productive, learning new things, trying things out. I've been spending a lot of this week working on e-commerce and working on building a website that'll have some stuff available for you guys very, very soon, because web design has been something that I've struggled exceptionally with. My website, if any of you have visited my website recently, I recently just downscaled it because for a long time I had this idea of what I wanted my website to look like in my head. And I finally just admitted defeat and realized that the ideas that I have are going to require way more code than I'm actually capable of doing or learning or actually even know where to begin doing. So I just dumbed my website right down to the point where it's now just basic as hell, but serves the purpose. But I do want to get a lot better at that side of things. And I'm also fascinated by it. I love design. I love learning about that sort of stuff. And I think that I would just love to learn a couple new things. So I hope that you guys are doing the same. I want to start this podcast by doing a hard call to action. I've got here in my notes literally written hard call to action. I want to encourage all of you to share the podcast with someone you know. I usually say this at the end of the episodes for those of you that listen all the way through, but I kind of noticed that I'm sure there's a lot of you like myself with other people's podcasts. Once you notice the podcast starting to wind down, you turn it off because you realize that you've gotten everything out of it. And I want to just encourage each and every one of you. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to each of you that have been listening week after week. We had an amazing week this week. We had about twice the listeners that I normally get at this point in the week, which I was exceptionally excited about. I spoke about this last week. The fact that we are growing is incredibly good news and super, super exciting. And it's showing me that this is something that is value. People are finding value in it and people are enjoying it. And the fact that I'm finding so much enjoyment in doing it, and the fact that I'm finding it not easy, but I'm finding it effortless for me to create in this style. And that obviously shows that there's something here. There's a reason why I find it so enjoyable and find it so easy to create in this style. I like the idea that each of us, right now there's this sort of idea that you should be doing everything. It's the Gary Vee model of have your hands in all the different baskets and have everything going at once and take full advantage of video, take full advantage of audio, take full advantage of written copy, take full advantage of all the different mediums that you can create in. But I heard this great thing this week, or I like the idea that no, I like the idea that you should be taking full advantage of the platform or the creation style that lends itself best to your personality. And for me, like I've said many times, I have an incredibly loud internal dialogue. If I wasn't talking to the microphone right now, I'd probably be talking to myself. And I think that kind of works exceptionally well for this podcast style. It works well for this sort of conversational style. Plus, I'm deeply interested in these topics. I'm deeply interested in the topic that I'm going to talk about today. I'm deeply interested in every topic that I've spoken about. And I'm just interested in having these open conversations about things that, aren't necessarily at the forefront of my page on Instagram or on my YouTube content, because it's kind of a compressed version of everything that I do, or kind of the most attractive version. I like to think that my Instagram is personal in the sense that I get on my stories and I write deeply in my captions and I try to share as much as I can with you guys. But at the end of the day, I post pretty pictures. And my YouTube channel, I post 5 to 10 minute videos. But here on the podcast, I have the opportunity to really share what interests me at a much deeper level. I have the opportunity to really just be open with you guys. And I think that that's awesome. So I want to thank you so much for listening. And I want to encourage each and every one of you listening right now, if you could hit pause on the episode, go down to the share button if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes or whatever you're listening on. There will be a button that it'll be 3 dots or a little share symbol or whatever it is, hit share, and I want you to text or message or send someone the link for this episode and let them know that you've been enjoying the podcast. Maybe give them a little description of what the podcast is about. Send them a specific episode that they think or you think might resonate with them, and let them know to have a listen, because if each and every one of you did that, then that would help me more than you could possibly imagine. I don't want your money. I don't want anything from you. All I want is for you guys to share the podcast around to people that you think will have a similar interest that you guys have found in this podcast, if you've enjoyed it at all. And if you haven't, that's okay. If you're a first-time listener, ignore everything I've just said. Make sure that you get to the end of this one and find out whether you actually enjoy the podcast before you go sharing the podcast to anyone else. I don't want you sharing something that you don't know or don't fully understand yet. So make sure that you get the most out of the podcast before you share it with someone else. But I appreciate every single one of you more than you could possibly imagine. So thank you so much for listening. To you listening right now specifically, yes, I'm talking to you. Thank you so much. I want to talk about book club, because I've been getting so many messages from you guys saying that you have this I got a message from a few people this week telling me how much they enjoy the fact that I talk about my running and I talk about book club. And it's kind of this weird collaboration or weird combination that they never thought they'd experience on one podcast. The fact that we're kind of the audience that we're developing, the little community where we're all bookworms and athletes at the same time. And I thought that was awesome. So I want to make book club kind of a formal part. Maybe I won't touch on it if I don't read anything during the week, but this week I did some amazing reading that really resonated with me, and I also finished or almost finished another book. I'm going to promise you I'm not going to do that, because I did that with what was it? The War of Art. I said that I finished it before I actually did finish it, but I read. And I also picked up 2 new books this week. So the 2 new books that I picked up this week, and I've got them here in front of me for the YouTube listeners right now. I picked up Do the Work and Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield. If you watched last week's episode, or the week before that as well, I spoke incredibly highly of The War of Art, which I just cannot express how valuable that book has been, not only in me as a creative, but also right now. I think reading it right now, especially someone from Australia, especially someone who's in an industry that has been directly affected, I cannot encourage you enough to go ahead and read that book. So Turning Pro and Do the Work are 2 books that I picked up this week. They're his other 2 non-fiction novels. So like I said, he's a fiction writer primarily. I can't remember how many books he's written. He's written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, he's got a few more. So he's got The Lion's Gate, The Authentic Swing. So I'll have to pick up those as well. Looks like I'm spending more money on books this week. But yeah, I picked up these 2, and hopefully they're only tiny little reads. If you're looking on YouTube, they're like 120 or 130 pages each. So tiny little reads. I might even try and finish Do the Work tonight, because this one's tiny. I think it's only like 100 pages. Yeah, 98 pages. So I'll probably try and do that tonight or tomorrow. I also am almost finished. I know I've dragged this one on a while. I spoke about this a few weeks ago, but I kind of put it down because I got into The War of Art, and then kind of relationship novels are a little bit interesting in the sense that I don't enjoy them as much as, and I watched this video this week that was fantastic, and essentially spoke about reading in general. I think the misconception that a lot of people have is that, yes, you read to enjoy it, but if you aren't someone who currently reads, you kind of need to get the idea of enjoyment and combine it with the fact that you're going to be gaining something valuable from your reading. What motivates me the most is the value that I gain from my reading. I feel like when I've had a good week of reading, I am just a happier person, a more well-rounded person, and I feel like I'm building on ideas. If I haven't had a decent week of reading, I don't feel like I've gotten the most. I don't feel like I can give this podcast the most that I have available to me. A lot of the ideas that I build for the podcast are built upon reading, or built upon ideas that I had that I further developed through my reading. So I think that relationship books are kind of one of those types where I feel like I need when I want to read relationship books, I really want to read relationship books. But when I don't, I find it really difficult to sit down and read them. But I got back into reading this one this week, and I'm almost finished it, and I do highly recommend it. The only issue with it I find is it's kind of meant to simulate relationship psychology, relationship counseling. So you're supposed to read it with your partner, and at the end of each chapter it has a couple pages that are kind of designed as a questionnaire that you have between you and your partner, where you reflect on the chapter and all that sort of stuff. I've just been reading it by myself, so I've just been skipping the end part of each chapter. So if you are someone who is also not wanting to read it with your partner, or wanting to read it by yourself, or you're just single, just skip those parts of the chapters and you should be fine. And the last part of my reading that I wanted to share with you guys this week is the Daily Stoic. And I read this part today or yesterday. And if you guys don't know, the Daily Stoic is the kind of book where you read it one page at a time. The pages are literally dated. You're supposed to start it on January 1st, and it's supposed to be something that you go about through the course of a year. And it's kind of the idea is that you read the one page and then you meditate on that idea throughout the day and try to incorporate that aspect of Stoicism into your daily life. And the page that I read that really, really resonated with me was the source of your anxiety. And I'll read it now because I think it will be valuable for what I'm about to talk about later in the episode. So it's by Epictetus in Discourses 2.13.1. And it says, "When I see an anxious person, I ask myself, what do they want? For if a person wasn't wanting something outside of their own control, why would they be stricken by anxiety?" And then Ryan Holiday goes on to translate that by saying that the anxious father worried about his children, what does he want? A world that is always safe. A frenzied traveler, what does she want? For the weather to hold and for the traffic to part so she can make her flight. A nervous investor, that the markets will turn around and an investment will be paid off. All of these scenarios hold the same thing in common. As Epictetus says, it's wanting something outside of our control. Getting worked up, getting excited, nervously pacing. These intense, pained, and anxious moments show us at our most futile and servile. Staring at the clock, at the ticker, at the next checkout lane, at the sky, it's as if we all belong to a religious cult that believes that the God's fate will only give us what we want if we sacrifice our peace of mind. Today, when you find yourself getting anxious, ask yourself, why are my insides twisted into knots? Am I in control here, or is my anxiety? The most important, is my anxiety doing me any good? And this really resonated with me this week in particular because, like I spoke about last week, I kind of just had not an epiphany because I don't like the idea of kind of like suddenly coming to a realization, because it is something that I always knew. But essentially the whole situation that's going on here in Melbourne recently, the whole situation that's going on worldwide, the way that 2020 is going as a whole, I think that it's okay to acknowledge, and I have certainly done that in the sense that I've acknowledged what's going on and I've acknowledged that it's a difficult time. I've acknowledged that I'm not going to be super happy with the outcome of 2020 this year. But I kind of needed to remind myself that it's okay to acknowledge that, it's okay to be aware of that, but it's not okay to let the negativity that surrounds that situation impact your life. And that came in the form of news, that came in the form of opinions, that came in the form of my anxiety related to the situation. There are still things, and I love this, that I got from 7 Habits, and it's something that's ripe in Stoicism, and it's the idea of your reasoned choice, or the things within your circle of influence. What is within the things that you can control? And in Stoicism, it puts it pretty bluntly, it essentially eliminates everything outside of your mind. You are not in control of. And that excludes your body, that excludes your health, that excludes your life, that excludes your job, that excludes literally everything but your mind. And the thing that I noticed with that, and the thing that's brought me a lot of peace in learning about Stoicism and reading about Stoicism and in trying to incorporate it into my life, is that it's so right. It is right in the sense that, yes, the only thing that we are capable of controlling to the fullest and most broad sense of the term, in the truest sense of the term, is our own mind. And in controlling your own mind. You can only really you can't control this situation. You can't control the outcome. You can't control what happens to you. You can only control the way you respond to those situations. And I think that for some people might come across as a source of your anxiety, the fact that you control so little. But I think that for me, in understanding that recently, I've understood like, oh wow, that's a massive amount of control. Yes, this year has been bad. Yes, there are things that I would change about it. Yes, I wish that my career had progressed as well as it was supposed to this year. Yes, I wish that I got all the travel opportunities that I was supposed to get this year. I was supposed to be diving with manta rays for the manta ray migration in Fiji in July, which was supposed to be that was the trip I bought my underwater housing for. I was so incredibly excited for that trip and it got cancelled. I was supposed to go to the Dolomites this year for work and that got cancelled. There's so many parts of this year that completely disappeared because of this situation. But the thing that brought me a lot of comfort, the thing that made me understand, or the thing that Stoicism has kind of taught me this year, and this is something that I haven't just used in my work. I had a breakup earlier this year, and this has helped me quite a lot, is the understanding that I still can control my response. I can still control the way I respond to those situations. I can still control the things that I do beyond those situations. You know, what can I learn from this? How can I be better? How can I take advantage, or not advantage, because advantage is I don't like the word toxic either, but advantage is not a great word, but it is kind of that situation where going through that breakup, it was a situation where I was like, okay, what can I learn from this? What can I take from this situation? Not, I wish it were different. Not, I wish things were different. Not, I wish it would have gone a different way, or that things had turned out differently. I've just said different 4 times in a row, but you get what I mean. My mind immediately jumped to, what can I learn from this situation? My mind last week, with this whole situation going on in Melbourne with the stage 4 lockdowns, my mind immediately jumped to, how can I be better? How can I learn? What am I still in control over? How can I take most advantage of? How can I take, my English needs to get better, but how can I take advantage of this situation to the best of my ability? And I think that has brought me a lot of peace, and I think that could bring a lot of you a lot of peace. So I hope that you took as much away from that passage as I did. If you own the Daily Stoic and you want to review that page, it's page 42 in the second chapter, or in chapter February, and it's the source of your anxiety is the page. So I hope you enjoyed that, because it's brought me a lot of value this week. So if I can give you one thing from this podcast, even though I haven't even gotten to the topic that I wanted to talk about today, if I can give you one thing, and this is kind of an extension, I love the idea that I gave this a piece of advice for when I spoke about talking to camera. I love talking to camera as if I'm talking to someone specifically, and I do have a few people in mind when I give these advice or give these pieces of advice, and I like the idea that this podcast comes out on Monday, because it's kind of a cool thing that I feel like I can start your week off well, or I can at least give you something to think about for the rest of the week. So if I can give you something to think about for the rest of this week, if you're listening to this on Monday, and even if you're not, if you're listening to this in the future, whatever day you're listening to, I want you to try and take this into your life in the next few days. If you are someone who's sort of been struggling with either this situation, struggling with your own situation, struggling with a relationship, struggling with work, whatever it is. Even if you're listening to this in the future and we're out of lockdown and everything's normal again, whatever, I think that the fact that Stoicism has lasted so long, the fact that it is so popular, shows that it is valuable right now, but it will continue to be valuable for the remainder of time. If I can give you one thing, it's to take on board the advice of the Stoics, and remember that the only thing that you take on board the advice of the Stoics, and remember that the only thing that you are in complete control of is your mind. You're not in control of anything else. You can't control your body. You can't control your health. You can't control your life, your work, the people around you, the environment. There's nothing that you can control. The only thing you can control is your response to those things. You can't control the outcome. You can't control what happens. You can only control the way that you respond. So try to take that on board for the rest of this week, for the rest of today, for the rest of whenever. And I highly recommend, if any of you are out there, even if you're not much of a reader, it takes you 5 minutes every day. 5 minutes a day for you to pick up the Daily Stoic. I literally leave it on my laptop overnight. So it's the first thing I see when I wake up in the morning and I sit down and go to work. It takes me 5 minutes to read it every single day. So pick up the Daily Stoic and try to incorporate it a little bit into your life, because it has helped me a massive amount. Before I get into the topic that I wanted to speak about today, I wanted to talk about... I got a few messages, or I have been getting a few messages this week from people talking about the podcast helping them. And that's why I wanted to talk about this topic. That's why the title is what it is. I've gotten a few messages recently from people talking about how the podcast has helped them. I wanted to talk about this because, to be quite honest with you, it's been fucking overwhelming. It's been incredibly overwhelming to read those messages, because I never in a million years would have thought that something I would create would have that kind of effect on someone, because I've sat in that same position. I have sent those messages. I've been those people that send the messages, or that find the content, or find the podcast, or find the book, or find the song that helped me get through those situations. I've worn those shoes, and I've found. I remember quite vividly, like Rick Gervais, for example, is someone in my life who will never hear this, will never read this, will never experience this, but I remember there was a dark point in my life where I would watch his comedy specials because I knew that by simply laughing, it would help me to feel like, to be happier in that moment. And it was incredibly overwhelming to receive those messages this week, to receive those messages from people over the past few months, talking about how this podcast has helped them. And I want to let you know, if you are one of those people and you know who you are, it gets so much better. It gets a lot better. I have worn your shoes. I have been in your situation. I have been those people that sit there finding the content that makes them laugh, lets them escape, makes them smile, or helps walk them through the situation that they're going through. And I wanted to let you know that it gets so much fucking better. It gets so much fucking better. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the person who's receiving the messages, or maybe you'll be the person that helps that person get through those situations. Because I've worn those shoes. I've been in that position. I know how it feels. So I want to let you know that you're not alone. So thank you so much for those messages. I appreciate it so much, because it fires me up. It fires me up to keep doing this podcast. It gets me so fucking excited that this podcast is something that I enjoy, and I find so much joy and excitement and fulfillment in doing. But it's also something that's helping people. Even on a small level, even if it's something that's just a routine. I'm not trying to sit here and tell you that anything I'm saying is groundbreaking, because it's not. It's literally just stuff that I read. It's stuff that I hear. It's stuff that I have learned throughout the years. It's stuff that I've gone through. It's stuff that I've experienced. That's all any of this is. It's not special, but even if it is just a situation where you listen to this podcast every single Monday and it helps you in whatever way, even if it's something that you put on and zone out, thank you so much for letting me know. So I hope I'm just fucking stoked that you guys are enjoying this. I'm sorry for swearing so much. I really try not to swear as much on this podcast, because I don't want to. I know how off-putting it is, and I also know that it sometimes looks like you're replacing your vocabulary. Of course, I stumble over my words when I say vocabulary, but it is a case where sometimes swearing can replace your vocabulary. I promise I'm just getting fired up by this. If my swearing gets excessive, it's because I'm fired up. And it's also because I'm Australian. But yeah, so thank you so much for those messages. Okay, today's topic is something that I have wanted to make for a while. I want to preface this by saying we're about to get super fucking personal. We are about to go in on a few things that have been a big part of my life, a big thing that I've had to overcome when I was younger. a few things that I have only recently overcome and years ago overcame. And we're about to get really personal. So I want to preface that by saying that I want to keep this lighthearted. I want to keep this fun. I want to keep this enjoyable, because at the end of the day, that is like, this podcast is just, like I said, yes, I would love for this to be a podcast where it is something that leaves you feeling a certain way or leaves you with a piece of knowledge that you wouldn't have otherwise had. I would love for this to be something that is part of your weekly routine, part of your group of podcasts that you feel like you learn a lot from. But I also just know that at the end of the day, if I make you smile, if I make you laugh, if I leave you feeling a little bit better at the end of the 45 minutes to an hour than when you started, then I've done my job. And I think that, like I said earlier, the fact that this is something that comes out on a Monday, I think that's pretty fucking cool, because it at least gives you something. So I want to just preface that by saying that this is probably going to get a little bit personal. I'm going to try and keep it lighthearted. I'm going to try and keep it valuable for you, but just know that it's going to get personal. I wanted to talk about insecurities. It's a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a while, because it's very near and dear to my heart. It's something that I've experienced. It's something that I think is incredibly valuable for a lot of people. It's something that I think a lot of people go through, especially men. And I'm going to preface this by saying that I can only acknowledge the experiences of a man. I can only acknowledge my experiences. I'm not going to sit here and try and pretend that I know other people's experiences, because I don't. I'm going to talk from my experiences. So know that if I say anything that kind of leans towards what a man would experience, because I know we do have a lot of female listeners. For some reason, my podcast has the highest demographic of female viewers out of all my different spots that I put content online. So I'm going to acknowledge you right now, and just know that if I say anything that kind of leans towards what a man would experience, that's because I'm drawing from my own experiences. So try to keep that in mind as you're listening. I wanted to talk about insecurities because I think that I have said this before. I was a very insecure kid when I was younger. I have until probably 2 or 3 years ago really struggled with insecurity, really struggled with anxiety, really struggled with my perception of my idea of how other people perceive me. And I wanted to talk about the few things that I have experienced, and I wanted to translate it into what I've done to fix them. One of the biggest ones that I experienced when I was younger is I was picked on a lot at high school, or in school in general, for my intelligence and for the way I thought people thought about me, the way I thought people looked at me, the way I thought people perceived me, the way I thought people perceived the things I said. I was picked on a lot for what I would say or the things I would say. And it was, as everyone knows, once you finish school, once you pass through that age group, you kind of understand that insecurity breeds insecurity. The people that are picking on you are only picking on you because they themselves are feeling the way that they express onto you. Usually the things that they find annoying or pick on you for are things that they also experience in their own life. So try to, before I acknowledged that, I was always very afraid of the way, or very scared, or very concerned, or just generally anxious about the way people looked at me, the way people perceived me. And this led to, I don't want to say, it led to me being a very, very quiet person through pretty much, 15 to 20 years old. Before I sort of escaped from that age group and did my own thing, it led to me being a very quiet person. It led to, I don't want to say an eating disorder, but it was pretty bloody close, which came from body dysmorphia and not really seeing myself the way that I actually was, and wanting to be this image, or wanting to be this person that would be the perfect person for the people that I was concerned about. I wanted to be big. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be smart. I wanted to be witty. I wanted to be all the things that people would pick on me for. And it also developed in relationships. I've experienced a lot, and I've probably spoken about this before briefly. I suffer from a lot of insecurities when it comes to relationships, and this is from past relationships. This is from relationships when I was much younger. But I am what you would describe as a needy boyfriend. I have a retroactive jealousy disorder. I don't think it's a disorder. Retroactive jealousy, anxiety. I think it is disorder, but I don't like that word because it makes it sound way worse than it is. But it's essentially an anxiety relating to insecurities in a relationship. Situations where, if any of you have experienced this sort of thing where neediness takes over, it is a form of anxiety, because those moments where those things happen, it is just sort of an out of control moment. It is sort of just you lose all control and your emotions completely take over. It is a fight or flight response, which is what I'm learning a lot of in relationship psychology, which is why I read a lot on relationships. I'm not going to get too deep on the specifics of each insecurity or each form of anxiety that I faced. I just wanted to give the context of what I'm talking about here. But I want to talk specifically on my relationships. I'm going to draw from my relationship anxieties or insecurities, and I'm going to draw from my intellectual anxieties or insecurities, because I think those are the two most powerful ones. With my body and my relationship with food and all that sort of stuff, I'm going to draw from it briefly, but I think that for me it was a case where it was a little bit of a coming of age thing, where once I realized that the world is much bigger than the group of people that you hang around with in high school, those things kind of not disappeared, because they never really disappeared, but I was able to work through them through just meeting new people and experiencing the world. And I think that that's why I would encourage any of you who are a little bit younger, try to remember that the group or the people that you're surrounded by when you're younger aren't always going to be the same people. And those people that, to be perfectly honest with you, don't really matter. Don't matter in the grand scheme of your life. So I don't want to draw from those ones as much, because my relationship with food, my relationship with body dysmorphia and all that sort of stuff was more a case of being picked on in high school. It was more a case of a whole bunch of consequences of going to a school that was quite athletic, doing things when I was younger that were very based around athleticism, not being someone who, right now it's pretty ironic for me to say, but I'm someone who's not very naturally talented when it comes to athletic ability. I'm not someone at all. It's something that I have worked towards my entire life. It's something that I work very hard on. And it's also just a case of I've been doing this stuff, yes, I've participated in my Ironman training over the last 12 months, but I've been doing this sort of stuff for over a decade. I think the first time I walked into a gym, I was 13 years old. So yeah, pretty much just over a decade of time. And over the course of a decade, you're bound to transform the person that you are. But I guarantee if I hadn't have walked into that gym when I was 13 years old, I would be a very different person, at least physically, than I am now. So I don't want to draw from those as much, but I want to talk about my insecurities in regards to my intelligence and the way I don't like the word intelligence, but I was picked on for not being super book smart when I was younger. I was more of a type of person that I considered myself to always have a little bit of emotional intelligence, but I struggled at school. I really, really struggled at school, and I was picked on for that. And then my relationships as well. I think there's 4 key things that I've sort of done, or the things that I've learned throughout my life that have really helped me work through these, and I want to talk about each one of those for those of you listening who have experienced this in your own life. The first thing that I acknowledged when I was younger, or the first thing that I needed to overcome, and probably the first step that I took in all of this, is that I need to drop the chip on my shoulder. I don't have anything to prove. One of the consequences I think of, and this is something that I think is probably prevalent with a lot of people, is when you go through maybe a situation in a relationship where things, cheating, or situations where things weren't as pleasant, or maybe you got picked on when you were a kid. In my case, maybe it was a little bit of getting picked on through high school and through junior school and through whatever element of schooling. Later in life, maybe you had a toxic boss, or maybe you had someone in a workplace bullying, that sort of stuff. One of the consequences of those situations is that you develop a chip on your shoulder. You develop an idea that you have something to prove. And one of the things that I had to learn is that, yes, I acknowledge that chip on my shoulder probably made me the person that I am today. Yes, I acknowledge that it developed my work ethic because I had this mentality that from having this insecurity associated with the way people perceive me, I had this idea that I had to work twice as hard to achieve or be at the bare minimum of what everyone else was at. I had this idea in my mind. I genuinely believed that I was just cursed to working twice as hard as everyone else. And I am incredibly happy for that. But the thing that I think that I needed to acknowledge was that when you feel like you have something to prove, when you have a chip on your shoulder, you're running away from something. You're running away from something, or you're preparing yourself for something that doesn't exist. For me, for example, I was preparing for a very specific moment. And I think a lot of you who suffer from the same sort of insecurities will probably feel the same way. And I'm going out on a limb here, but you can narrow down a pretty specific moment or a specific time or a specific circumstance in your life that you developed this chip on your shoulder, you develop this need to prove from. You know that specific moment, and you have this character, or you have this person, or you have this life in your mind that is perfect for that moment. That's what my chip on my shoulder was. It was me trying to be this perfect person or be this representation of what would be perfect for that moment. And what that led to is I wasn't doing things for me. I wasn't doing things because they were best for me. I wasn't doing things because they would bring out the best results. I wasn't doing things for my future. I was only doing things because I wanted to be that person. The only issue is, and the thing that I've learned a lot through my reading this year and through learning about psychology, and especially with relationship psychology, which is why I recommend relationship psychology so much, because a lot of things you learn a lot of things that you learn in those books are very universal. They're things that you can implement in the rest of your life. And the thing that I've learned a lot this year is that moment doesn't exist. That person doesn't exist. That moment doesn't exist. That thing doesn't exist. That perfect person that you're trying to be, that moment that you're trying to prove, that thing that you're trying to prove doesn't exist. Those people that gave you those feelings, those people, those events, that boss, that job, that whatever it was, that sport, that class, whatever it was in that moment that made you feel that specific way, that does not exist anymore. That is gone. Those people don't care. They've all moved on. Every part of that situation is gone. And you're wasting your time letting yourself be consumed by it. That's how ridiculous having a chip on your shoulder is. That's how ridiculous having something to prove is. And that's something that I recognized is I don't care about those people anymore. I don't care. Deep down, I don't care about the people that picked on me in high school. Deep down, I don't care about the situation that... In fact, I've completely forgiven the situation that happened in my relationships that led to the insecurities that I have now. I've completely overcome all these situations, but I still kept this chip on my shoulder. It was like I had recovered from the situation. Everything had moved on. Everyone had shaken hands and gotten over it. And here I was still thinking about it. That's how ridiculous having something to prove is. It's preparing yourself for a moment, preparing yourself for a thing, or doing everything in your life and letting yourself be consumed by something that no longer exists. That's how ridiculous having something to prove is. And that was something that I'm still overcoming to this day. I think a lot of I'm constantly having to second guess myself. It's like, are the things that I'm doing, are the relationships I'm getting into, am I dating for the sake of date? Am I doing all these things for me, or am I doing them for that moment? And I think this is something that you will always have to work on. The longer that you carry the chip on your shoulder, the longer that you're going to have to work out of it, and the more ingrained your life is around this persona that you've created for yourself. But I think acknowledging it is at least the first step. So if you are one of those people, I want you to just acknowledge how ridiculous it is. And I'm not trying to undermine it at all. I know how difficult this is. This is something that controlled me for a very long time. You know, I spent the first 2 years out of school. Sorry, my notifications on my bloody Apple Watch keep going off. Let's take this off. My first 2 years out of school, I spent them with the one sole goal of making money. And the only reason I had that goal is because I had something to prove to the people who said I couldn't. That didn't make me happy. In fact, I regret those 2 years immensely because it took me away from the thing that truly fulfilled me, and that was my creativity. It put me in a position where my only goal was, how can I make money fast? How can I prove to these people that don't matter? How can I have my life be as impacted? How can I have my life be consumed as much as possible by people that don't care about me? That's how ridiculous it is. So the first thing I did, or the first thing that helped me the most, and the first thing that I hope will help a lot of you, is if you are one of those people that has a chip on your shoulder, if you are one of those people that constantly feel like you have something to prove, or constantly feel like you're climbing up a hill, or constantly feel like the world is out to get you, first of all, know that I've been there. First of all, know that that's something that is way more common than you probably think. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that feel the exact same way, but know it's ridiculous. Know that you're the only one that's still hung up over that situation. You know, even though you were the quote unquote, and I don't like the word, but quote unquote victim from that situation, you're the only one who's still worrying about it now. So I think that a good question that you can ask yourself, and a good question that you can ask in general, and it comes back to the stuff I spoke about with Stoicism, is a thing I love to speak about, and a thing I love to incorporate into my life, is the question of how, and I got this from, what's his name? Tom Bilyeu from Impact Theory, the podcast that he does. Tom Bilyeu he's known far more than just the podcast. He's the CEO of Quest Nutrition, but he has a podcast called Impact Theory, which I highly, highly recommend. And one of the things that he asks, or one of the things that he tries to incorporate whenever anyone asks him a question or comes to him with an issue, he asks them to ask themselves, how is this the best thing that's ever happened to me? And I think by asking yourself that question, it kind of reframes your mindset to start to look for solutions, start to look for reasons why this is a good thing. And if I ask myself, and I'm not going to get too personal here, but if I ask myself, how is the situation that I learned from that relationship, how is that situation that at the time was negative and horrible, how is that the best thing that's ever happened to me? Well, it's made me a far more emotionally secure person because I'm now comfortable with myself in relationships. It's also taught me that as much as you may feel like you're the victim in a relationship, as much as you may feel like there's things that the other person did to you, as much as you may feel like it's a back and forth and all that sort of stuff, if I bring it back to Stoicism, the only thing that I can control is my own response. So what can I learn from this situation? I think one of the things that happens a lot, especially with cheating and especially in situations with relationships, is that, you know, someone will feel hard done by and they'll immediately go and turn into they'll immediately go and feel like they can be, like they were hard done by. They're the person that came off second best. And the consequences of that is they never really learn from their situation. They go to their friends, and if the girl did something to the boy, then the boy's mates are like, oh, screw her. If the boy did something to the girl, or if the girl did something to the girl, or boy did something to the boy, they'll go to their friends and immediately be met by, oh, screw it, they're not worth it. You deserve better, all those sort of things. And you end up in a situation where you never learn from that situation. You never learn because you never acknowledge what you did. You never learn from the situation. You never think about what you did that led to that situation in the first place. And I think that a good thing that you can start to ask yourself, and this relates to dropping the chip on your shoulder, is how is this the best thing that ever happened to me? You know, how is being picked on in high school for the way I looked, the way I behaved, how quote unquote intelligent I was, how is that the best thing that ever happened to me? Well, it led me to being a pretty bloody hard worker. It led me to understanding that the only way that I'm going to be completely happy is if I follow a path that's going to fulfill me, because nothing else matters. I don't care what other people think of me because I, at one point, really, really cared what people think of me. And I think that brings me to the second one, is that seek balance, not the alternative. When you're in a situation where and if I bring it back to me again, I don't want this to sound like it is just me, but drawing from my experience is the best way for me to portray this. But if I bring this back to, and I don't want to call it an eating disorder because I don't want to undermine people that go through genuine, really difficult eating disorders, but if I bring it back to mine, where I was essentially, starving myself to look a certain way, or eating in a very, 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 very strict way, and then binging, and this cycle of strict and excessively strict, and then binge, and excessively strict, and then binge. In that moment, all I wanted deep down was the alternative. But the thing that I would have made it far easier for me to acknowledge that I need to seek balance. And the only way that I was actually able to find that balance is by going all the way in the other direction. So I went from someone who was incredibly strict and going through that cycle of starving myself and binge, starving myself and binge, starving myself and binge, to someone that was just completely not giving a fuck. Didn't care about what they ate, didn't care about the way they looked, didn't care at all. And now I'm finding myself somewhere in the middle where I enjoy what I eat, but I'm aware of what I eat. And if I had have just acknowledged in that moment that I was looking for balance, I wasn't looking for the alternative. I wasn't looking for a life where I didn't get to care, because although that was a very dark and difficult part of, or a very scary part of my life, if I had have in that moment acknowledged that I'm not looking for an out, I'm not looking for freedom to not care, there are elements in that I could learn from. I am now very aware of what I'm eating. I'm now capable of sort of having a ballpark in my mind of, if I eat X, Y, and Z in a day, I'm going to be better fueled for tomorrow. If I eat this, then I'm probably going to feel like shit. If I do this, I'm going to probably feel this way. If I eat this, I'm going to perform better on my run tomorrow. There's a lot that I learned from that situation, as bad as it is. And if I had just acknowledged in that moment that I was seeking balance, not the alternative, then it would have made it a lot easier for me to not overcome that in that situation, but learn to be better. And it's the same thing with my relationships. I think that one thing that I went from someone who was very, very blasé and didn't really care, and that led to a situation in a relationship where it got to the point where I did need to care. And rather than finding a balance, rather than understanding like, okay, this happened, but what can I learn from this situation? Okay, now I can be a little bit more of a connected boyfriend. How can I be a better person in a relationship? I went all the way to the other direction. I went all the way in the other direction rather than finding that balance. And there is the argument out there that I think that is very valid, in the sense that you have to find the extremes to find balance. You have to have both extremes to find balance. But I don't think that's true. I think that when you're in one extreme, the only thing that you want deep down is the other extreme, because the other extreme seems super valuable. When you're someone who's going through an eating disorder where you're incredibly strict and starving yourself, the only thing you want is to not give a fuck about what you're eating. But not giving a fuck about what you're eating is not going to help you. Finding a balance in the middle where you're conscious and you're happy and you're fulfilled and you're enjoying food and you have a good relationship with food, but that is not attractive when you're deep in it. That's not something that you look at and go, yeah, I really want balance. So the second one that I wanted to speak about is seek balance, not the alternative. The third one is something that I spoke about a while ago for self-doubt. And I think that self-doubt plays a pretty critical role in insecurity, or plays a very similar role in insecurity, and that is to become mates with your insecurities and personify them. An analogy that I read a while ago, I think that I may have even said it in one of the earlier podcasts, is the idea of overcoming your insecurities is a lot like making friends. And this is going to be a pretty lighthearted way of representing it, so I do not want to come across like I'm undermining it at all. I'm not at all. But overcoming my insecurities has been a lot like making friends. And making friends feels pretty similar. We all know the situation where maybe you meet someone out, or you meet someone at a common interest, or you meet someone on something, and all of a sudden you guys hit it off and you get along really, really well. Maybe you meet on social media and it's something that you get along well with, and whatever. The next time that you ask to hang out with that person, it's a really nerve-wracking experience. It's something that it makes you really nervous. It's something that you second guess. Maybe you even blow them off. Maybe you ask to hang out and you blow them off. You ask to hang out in a public place. Maybe you go for a beer, whatever it is, and you're really, really nervous. You're still meeting in a public place. There's still no risk of meeting this person. If it's bad, you can leave, but you're super, super nervous about meeting them. Then you go for that beer, you have a great conversation, you enjoy yourselves, you realize that you get along even better than the way you thought, and you're like, okay, this is great. And then the next one comes around, and suddenly you're inviting that person over to your house, and you want to have dinner with them, you want to hang out, you want to do whatever. You're inviting that person into your home, and that's just as nerve-wracking or brings up just as much anxiety as when you had to meet that person publicly. But they come over and you realize it's okay. You realize it's not as bad as you thought it was going to be. You realize everything's okay. And in fact, you realize that you enjoy this and you wonder why you don't do it more often. And then suddenly you have a friendship and a person that you're comfortable with and a relationship that you're happy that you built in the first place. That, at least in my experiences, is very similar with insecurities. Usually, in the beginning, it's going to be incredibly difficult to take that first step to acknowledging them or overcoming them or exposing yourself to the thing that makes you uncomfortable or understanding that you're not that type of person or taking that first step, whatever it is. Let's talk about it in the sense of this. Dropping the chip on your shoulder is going to be an incredibly hard first step to take. But once you take that first step, the next step might make you just as nervous, but it's going to be far more beneficial to your relationship or to you overcoming that insecurity. Inviting that insecurity into your home, into your being, into your mind, really acknowledging that and letting it in is going to be just as daunting as the first time that you overcame it or the first time that you did anything to get better, but it's going to be far more beneficial for you than that first step. It's compounding. It's compounding is the only way to describe it. Inviting it into your life is going to be difficult but beneficial. Inviting it into your home is going to be even more beneficial, but just as difficult. Each step's never going to get any easier, but it's going to get better and better and better and better compoundingly. So that's the second one, is become mates with that. And the second part of that is personify your insecurities. One of the things that I think is great, and this leads into number 4, is acknowledging that they exist and personifying that insecurity is something that has helped me a lot. And one of the common threads that you read in personal development, one of the common threads that you read in psychology, one of the things that you learn about a lot is that acknowledging something is half the battle. Acknowledging that something exists is half the battle. And the reason for this is that until you acknowledge it, you can't become familiar with it. Until you acknowledge that that thing exists, until you acknowledge that it's a problem, until you acknowledge that that is something that you need to deal with, then you cannot recognize it when those things happen. A good example of this is my neediness in my relationships. I knew that it was an issue. Deep down, I knew it was an issue. I knew that it was something that I needed to improve on, but I had not acknowledged it. I hadn't brought it to the surface. I hadn't aired it out, and I hadn't given myself the opportunity to recognize those moments. I knew it was an issue, but every single time those triggers happen, every single time the behavioral triggers, if any of you have read any of the relationship psychology, a big word is behavioral trigger. Every single time those behavioral triggers would happen, rather than me acknowledging those moments and going, okay, I recognize this. This is one of those behavioral triggers. I would just let it take its course and have that fight or flight response. And I would end up in the same situation. Even though I knew it was an issue, even though I knew what was going on, even though I knew it was something I needed to get better at, the same situation would come and go. So simply by acknowledging it, and I want to give this story because I think this represents it well, the difference between knowing and acknowledging. One of the things that I used to do that used to piss me off to no end was when I was going through these situations, when I was going through rocky moments in my relationships, and inevitably you would catch up with friends. And I used to catch up with my friend, one of my closest friends. I'm probably going to have her on the podcast at some point to talk about relationships because I think we would have cool conversations. We have differing views, so it's kind of combative in the sense, and I think that would make for great conversation. Let me know in the comments or let me know in the reviews or send me a message if you guys would love to have me have some friends on that I think would have interesting conversations. But I would catch up with her and we would talk about the relationship, and I'd talk about how I don't understand why things aren't working. I don't understand why things aren't going well. Like, I'm doing all these things. Like, she's doing whatever, this isn't working. And then I'd leave my friend and I'd go back to my car and I'd sit in my car and I'd go, why the fuck didn't you just tell her what was actually happening? Why did you not just tell her that you're a needy boyfriend? Why did you not just tell her that you suffer with abandonment issues? Why did you not just tell her that that's something that you were going through? And that is the difference between acknowledging something and knowing it's an issue. The moment that you acknowledge it, the moment that you share, and I'm not telling you to share it with a friend, that's a pretty daunting step, but it's an easy way of demonstrating the difference. Once you acknowledge it within yourself, you can recognize that moment. You can begin to understand that, okay, this is something that's happened before. This is a moment that I need to overcome. For me, with my eating, for me, with my the way I was perceived by others, it was just acknowledging that that was something I needed to overcome. And by doing that, it made me aware of those moments where that was controlling my life, not my actual decisions or not what I actually wanted to do. So that's the last one, is try to acknowledge your insecurities and try to let it into your life. Try to personify your insecurities. Give it names. Turn it into a character within your own life. Like I said for the self-doubt episode, if you haven't listened to that self-doubt episode, I would highly recommend it. I can't remember which episode it is. I'll link it in the show notes of this episode if you're on Spotify. I'll link it in the description of the YouTube episode. Let me make a little note of that. I need to link self-doubt episode. Link self-doubt ep. I'll link it in the description of this episode so you guys can go ahead and listen to that. But in that, I spoke about how you can personify your self-doubt. And I would say the same thing for this. Turn them into characters within your own head, because once they turn into characters, they become tangible. And once something is tangible, it's far easier and far less scary. Because something that isn't tangible, an idea, an emotion, and an insecurity is very abstract and very weird and difficult to understand and difficult to recognize. But once it's tangible, once it's there, once you can recognize it, then it's easy for you to notice those moments. It's easy for you to do the things that you know you need to do and behave in the way that you know you need to behave. Because at the end of the day, all of us know the right things. All of us understand what is best for us. All of us have the best advice for each other. It's like what I said, and what I said for the first few episodes at the beginning of this. It's live your life as if you're the character in a video game. Try to play as if you're the character, or you are the main character in your video game. You're controlling yourself. Because all of us, if we were to sit down across the table from ourselves and for ourselves to tell ourselves all the things that we're struggling with, all the issues that we're going through, all of our procrastination issues, all of our work issues, all of the things that we're struggling with, maybe with uni or our education or our decisions in life or our health or our fitness or our eating, whatever it was, we would all have the appropriate advice to give that person. But it's a very different thing from acknowledging and understanding and then actually doing the things that you know you need to do. And a step that you can get, or a thing that you can do to get in the right direction, is learn to acknowledge and associate those issues and recognize those moments. Because when you recognize those moments, you can let that third person character or yourself controlling your own video game input the correct response, or input the response that is conscious. Because a lot of the time, these insecurities, these issues, a lot of the time, and a lot of the things that you're learning, or if you are reading the same books as me, a lot of what you learn, especially in relationship psychology, is that it's a fight or flight response. That's why we have these things. That's why we behave in ways that sometimes we don't recognize within ourselves. My neediness as a boyfriend doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. There's a lot of what I've done in my past that doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a lot. If I think about the person that I am, I'm a very comfortable person. I don't really care about the way people think of me. But if I talk, or if I look at the person that I was, that person's unrecognizable. And the reason for that is because a lot of the responses are fight or flight. And I think I'm going to add a fifth here, because I think it's important. I think I just discovered is forgive yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself in those moments, because those moments are really fucking difficult. You know, if you do something in a fight or flight response, if you do something or behave a certain way or act a certain way or end up in a situation that you're not super proud of, forgive yourself. Don't hold a grudge. You know, it's the same thing as holding a chip on your shoulder. It's like that moment is gone. That person is gone. That moment doesn't exist anymore. So forgive yourself, because if you're holding on to an issue, if you're letting yourself be controlled by that moment, if you're letting that moment control you longer than the duration of the moment itself, then you're the only person who's to blame for that moment. So try to forgive yourself in the moments where you do things that are unrecognizable. Because if you are listening to this and you do suffer with issues with insecurities, and you do go through moments where your insecurities take control of your responses and you have those behavioral triggers, try to forgive yourself for those moments, because at the end of the day, it is a fight or flight response. The only thing that you can do is prepare yourself best, educate yourself best, and begin to learn why you do these things. Because once you know why, like I said, you can begin to recognize those moments. So I think I'm going to leave it at that, because I'm happy with that, or the way that I've spoken about that. And I hope that that's helped you a little bit. I don't want to, I just want to say as well, I hope this episode wasn't too full on. I hope it wasn't too full on for you guys, because I wanted to speak on this, and I have wanted to speak on this for a while, or this topic, but I didn't know how to cover it without it being super personal. And I just came to the decision this week. I was like, look, I think that after getting I got a message this week that kind of really hit me in a positive way. It was a full-on message about how this podcast has helped them and helped that person or someone that that person's associated with. And it really hit home for me. And I was like, okay, it might make me uncomfortable to get a little bit personal in this episode. It might make me a little bit self-conscious. It might make me a little bit worried about who's going to listen to it. And at the end of the day, it's like, that is something that has been incredibly difficult for me to overcome. Is I, up until very recently, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, really, really suffered with the consequences of high school bullying, or being picked on in high school, over the way I spoke, the way I was perceived, my intelligence, that it affected my voice. It affected the way, not my voice literally, but my voice in how I expressed myself. The things I spoke about, the things I felt like I was allowed to speak about. But to have this situation now where I'm able to speak openly and comfortably with you guys about situations that I've gone through, it makes me incredibly proud of that young man who suffered so much with caring so much about what people thought of him. So I just want to let you all know that it does get a lot better. If you are someone who's taking a lot from this episode, if you are someone who suffers with some of the same things, it does get a lot better. Maybe you'll be doing something a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now that's going to shock the person that you are today. It comes back to what I said in a few episodes ago, which was one of my favorite episodes. It's you're only 6 months away. You're only 6 months away from a completely different life. You're only 6 months away from a completely different person. You're only 6 months away from a unrecognizable version of yourself. So keep that in mind if you're ever worried about, what you're doing and where you're at. Thank you so much for listening today. I've really enjoyed this episode. I hope it helped. I hope it wasn't too intense. I hope that I kept it at least lighthearted enough, or at least, I don't think it was very lighthearted at all, was it? I hope that I kept it at least valuable enough for you guys to start your week on a high, start your week going well. I hope you have an amazing week this week. I do hope you're having an amazing week if you are listening on Monday as this comes out. And if you're not, and if you're listening in the future, I hope you have a great day, afternoon, morning, or rest of your week whenever you're listening. If you have enjoyed this episode, if you've enjoyed any of the episodes that I've put out so far, I would really, really appreciate if you could share this podcast with a friend. Like I said at the start of the episode, I want you to go right now, if you're still listening, to the share button on Spotify or iTunes, on YouTube, whatever it is, find the copy link button. I want you to copy the link, and I want you to share it to a friend, or send it to a friend, or even if you're with someone right now, show them the podcast that you're listening to. Give them a little brief of what the podcast is about, or what you learned, or what you think they could gain from it, and share it around with someone you think might appreciate it as much as you have. If you're a first-time listener, I hope you did enjoy this episode. And if you're a long-time listener, thank you so much for being a part of this with me. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm so stoked that we have this opportunity once a week to get on here and chat. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to steal any more of your time. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, all of that is entirely up to you. I'm not your dad. You don't have to do anything I tell you to do. And I'll speak to you guys next week.